We're going to do in this hour, thank you. What we're going to do in this hour is really go through the whole ABC test, the independent contractor rule. I'll give some background, but our two speakers today, and it's primarily going to be Kelly McNaughton, who's an attorney at Fox Rothschild, and she's joined by her partner and colleague Ken Rosenberg. The three of us had a call about a couple of weeks ago. This is such an important issue because I've gotten a lot of emails and phone calls from a lot of our industry sectors that it's worthwhile kind of going through a lot of the examples and what we've heard. I'll also mention that back on May 14th, about 10 of our members, and Kathy and I met with the labor commissioner. His name is Kevin Jarvis. He's a new commissioner, still in an acting capacity, has to be confirmed, which I think he will be. But his background is he's an attorney. He was an attorney with the AFL-CIO. Then he did a couple of stints with under Governor Corzine as an assistant commissioner in labor. So he's well versed. I thought the meeting that we had went really well, but we'll kind of share what he said about the rule. But I want to give some context and some background. This issue really blew up back in 2019, right before COVID, when Senate President Sweeney had introduced legislation to really go after the misclassification of employees. And this is what this is all about. Are you really a W-2 versus a 1099? In addition to that legislation, Governor Murphy at the time put together a task force, an executive order saying, hey, we got to look at this issue because not only are the workers missing out on benefits and probably pay, but the state is missing out on payroll taxes and some other issues. So that report was finalized in 2019. Fast forward, COVID hit, everything kind of stalled. And then about a year ago, I remember the previous commissioner, Robert CIANJ, calling me because I guess they were anticipating a lot of people were going to have questions like, why is the Department of Labor, finalizing a rule now when they were basically operating under the statute that goes back several years, decades probably. And they were going under the whole ABC test. There were a lot of court cases, and I'm sure Kelly and Ken kind of go over them. But if you look at the preamble to the rule that was finalized on May 5th, I went through it, and they do reference a lot of court cases. And their rationale, by the way, of finalizing this. So this started under Governor Murphy. Governor Sherrill comes in. We thought we were going to be successful. When I say we, all the business groups kind of pushed back and said to the governor and her team and to the new labor commissioner, we think you ought to just stay the rule. Don't finalize it because it really is going to create a lot of angst and anxiety out there. And what happened is they finalized it. So we went in on May 14th, and the labor commissioner's exact words were, Tony, everybody is being treated the same, whether it was May 4th before the rule went final or May 6th after the rule went final. But you still have to pause and question, well, then why finalize the rule? So, and then I guess, Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you and we can get into the ABC and things that you want to point out. But two things that people should be aware of. The department has the authority and they have conducted audits of employers, but also this could be triggered if one of your employees that's a 1099 files a complaint. And there's a questionnaire right on the website that they would send that employee and say, answer the following questions and we'll conduct an audit. So it's an important rule, but I think in addition to the state regulations, Kelly's going to go through the IRS ABC test and some other things. So welcome, Kelly and Ken, and the floor is yours, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that opening. I thought that was a really great, history on how we got here. And I think one thing that's important to note of why they would want to finalize this rule is because case law is binding until it's not. In the sense, there could be another case that comes in that changes the way that that the test is interpreted. But once it becomes a regulation, it's more final in the sense that that is now the governing regulations of the state, whereas the case law, while still binding, was more piecemeal and not fully incorporated. Because the last case that sort of addressed this was in 2022. That was the East Bay drywall case involving construction company. So from then until now, the state has been viewing these cases, the same way they are now, which is true. But now we have a regulation that they can point to that is going to stay the course. And while the case law might interpret the regulation, it's going to be more binding in the sense that a new court can't come in and change the way they think about it. It will have to go through the legislative process. So by way of, just to throw that out there, this is a little bit more permanent maybe than the case law was, although we've been heading in this direction, as you mentioned, for decades. So while, the rule does not go into effect until October, everyone should be thinking about this now, because this is definitely the way that the New Jersey DOL is viewing these cases from an audit perspective. And as you said, these cases kind of come up for employers in one of two ways. It can either come through an audit, which always comes through an audit, but it either comes through based on an employee complaint, which we've seen happen. They don't tell you how it comes through, but you can kind of see based on where they're focusing. They tend to focus on a couple of employees. You can kind of figure it out. Or they've been really targeting certain industries. And I think one thing we'll talk about today is, although the examples didn't make it into the final iteration of the rule, those are a great way that the DOL is forecasting the way they're thinking about these industries, and they might be targeting them. For example, the construction industry has been a target for many years because they're prone to using a lot of independent contractors and also subcontractors, which the state, for them to just pick any construction company in the state, they're likely to find employees that or individuals that they feel are misclassified. So that's just sort of like our take on what we've been seeing. And we've been seeing also a lot of restaurants, other types of companies that are, using independent contractors in certain ways. So that's sort of a little bit more background, but it's true that if you get audited today or if you get audited in November, the approach is going to be the same. So it's important that we all think about this now going forward. And as far as the ABC test, there's 3 prongs, which we'll get into, but it's important to know that the burden is on the employer to prove that they meet all 3 prongs. So, and we'll talk about this today, you may feel like, well, I'm not controlling them. They're doing everything and they can meet the prong A, which we'll get into, but you have to also meet all of the prongs, and it's entirely on the punitive employer, is what they call it in the regulation, to show that. So if you're not able to provide all of the data they're looking for, then it's going to be on you. They're not going to make assumptions about it. It's really going to be, and they're not going to get it from the employee, although they might, some of it, but it's really on you to, as the employer, to maintain all of that information. So there's been a lot of talk about the 3 prongs. We'll go through them now. Prong A is they're going to be looking to the extent that there is freedom from control, meaning, is this individual being controlled by the employer? So they're going to look at hours, jobs, work, equipment, all of those things that they're going to see. Are they being told to go to a certain job site at a certain time? Okay, that's going to be evidence of control. Are they being supervised? Are these individuals being given equipment? Are they being told how much to charge? All of these factors will be evidence that they are really an employee, right? So that's something to think about, especially when it comes to something like tools and equipment. If you're bringing your own equipment to a job site and no one's telling you how to do that job, they just say, okay, do this job, bring whatever equipment you want, bring whatever employees you want, that's going to be evidence of lack of control, on the other hand, which is what you would want to prove if you were an employer being audited, trying to prove that the individuals working for you are not employees.
Kelly, do you mind if I jump in? Because I think it's important. For people to understand prong A, like Kelly said, and this came up, and I forgot to mention that there was a 4-hour legislative hearing where I was in attendance where Senator Moriarty focused on prong A because he received a lot of calls from his constituents. Because to Kelly's point, control, right? What does that mean? If you have a subcontract and you issue them a 1099, they have a scope of work, they have basically a job to do, and you, as the person paying their bill, should check in. And he said, you know what, Commissioner, do we have any clarity around prong A? Can you put things in writing? And this is an important thing to say. He would not commit, and even at our meeting on May 14th, they're not going to commit to putting anything in writing in an email because of all these court cases. His advice was call, if you have a doubt, call the Department of Labor and ask that question. So Kelly, I just raised that because we can kind of go through some examples and maybe we'll take a pause. I want everybody to understand what prong A is, that, you can't tell them, hey, start at 10 o'clock, finish at 3. Basically, if you give them that 1099 and you give them that job, do the job, right? How they get that job done is really up to them.
Hey, Tony, I just want to jump in there and just kind of footnote the offer by the department to field questions about whether any of these prongs are being met. In the past, the Department of Labor would issue, you could write and request a formal opinion and get an opinion and then rely on that if you were audited afterwards by the department, 5, 10 years later sometimes. And you pull out this opinion and say, we asked the department about how our business was operating, and you told us in writing and gave us this opinion that we were operating, as independent contractors and that it was legal. The court, New Jersey Supreme Court, basically eviscerated that ability to the department to provide opinions because the opinions were generally being written by, not the commissioner himself, but people who worked for the agency. And the court, I think it was a milk delivery court case actually, in which basically the employer had relied on this opinion written by the Department of Labor to justify how it was operating and using independent contractors, and the court said, well, it wasn't issued by the commissioner himself, therefore it wasn't the agency's true opinion, and you can't get opinions now out of the Department of Labor. They basically stopped giving them. So if you call and you get a verbal opinion from them, it's worth the weight, of that opinion, which is nothing. So
Yeah, I
you
guess.
can't rely on it. But
Yeah, I guess that's a good point, Ken, because I guess it ties back to all the court cases. But the sense that we got on May 14th is they want to help, right? The department wants to help. They want to clarify. They know these kind of questions are going to come up, and they kept saying it's going to probably be held on a case by case basis. So I don't know if that's good or bad, depending on the situation. But to your point, yeah, I guess you got to take it with a grain of salt if you get
yeah,
some verbal clarification.
yep.
And you guys are the attorneys, so you just got to document it
I,
somehow.
I would probably, I think the safer route is to speak to your attorneys and, whoever your labor and employment counsel is, and really get into, provide them all the facts and get a true, non-biased opinion from your attorney about whether what you're doing is gonna succeed in an audit or not. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times we're going to have to tell you that it's not going to work out, but
Yeah.
we'll explore it. Kelly, can you get into some of the other factors under prong A, um, which, besides just controlling, the equipment, the tools, the services, times of the services provided, but some of the other nuanced issues that are looked at?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
I was also going to just say to your point about getting an opinion from the state is that they reserve the right to look at everything in a case by case basis, and it might depend on. So even though there are all these factors we're talking about right now, they could choose to weigh one factor more heavily than another, which makes it even a little bit harder to kind of predetermine what they might say. Um, So yeah, they're also going to look at like who sets the rate of pay, right, for any particular job. And that was an issue in the East Bay drywall case where the company was setting the rate that all of the contractors were being paid. There was no negotiation, which is similar to how an employee comes. You know, an employee comes and works for you, you tell them, okay, we're paying you $25 an hour or whatever it may be. And there's not that back and forth negotiation. So that's a big one that they're going to look at. They're also going to look at, is there any training being provided, or are they literally just coming and doing the job fully on their own? Because employees get training, right? Employees get supervision. So if there's any evidence of that, that's going to cut against this prongs analysis. Also, they're going to look at who bears the risk of loss of a job. You know, does the company that's coming in to do the work, or the individual, do they carry their own liability insurance? Do they carry workers' compensation insurance? Because all of these things might be evidence, you know, depending on how they look at it, that either you're an employee, meaning you just come and your employer is fully responsible, or at least mostly responsible for the work you do, versus a true contractor who's taking on the full liability.
And I think who else, you know, another important factor when looking at factor A is, you know, who is obtaining the job itself. You know, who's responsible for negotiating and acquiring the work that has to be performed? Is it the employer or is it the independent contractor? In most instances, obviously, the contractor or the employer is obtaining that work and then is looking for people to perform it. If that's the case, and that's a very strong factor, which the department's going to rely on to find, you know, employee status.
Right. There's just one thing I want to say about prong A that is a little bit reassuring, perhaps, is that there is this regulatory compliance carve out. So in many industries, there are certain things that need to be reported either to the federal government or to the state in order to be within like regulations. For example, like financial advisors, you know, there's certain reportings that need to be filed. And that in and of itself is not going to be evidence of control just because that reporting needs to be done. However, there, you know, that might not win the day if there are other factors under prong A that they don't meet. But that's just one thing that they're not going to use to
Yeah, I'd like to actually add on to that as well, and just kind of point out, like a lot of businesses have anti-harassment policies, which require all their employees, their vendors, their suppliers, independent contractors to basically comply with their anti-harassment policies. And those anti-harassment policies are basically saying you have to comply with, you know, you can't harass or discriminate our employees, the employer's employees, um, you know, if you work with us, and because then the employer itself may be liable by virtue of the independent contractor or the other business's employees' actions. So that also is an example of, well, if an employer requires another business to comply with its anti-harassment policies, or, for example, even OSHA standards, that in and of itself, as Kelly was saying, would not by itself mean that the control test has been met. It would require other factors as well.
Yeah. So I think, you know, to try to move on to prong B, if unless there's any questions about prong A, I know it's sort of pliable and it's going to really vary based on circumstances. But if are there any questions before we move on? Okay. So prong B, I think, is one where a lot of the trouble will begin because control, you know, it's easy enough maybe to show that you're not being controlled, but outside the usual course of business and outside all places of business is going to be challenging because oftentimes, think of a construction subcontractor. They're doing construction work, which is what the construction contractor does. That is what their business is. So when you bring in an individual to do the work that the business itself does, that is going to be a problem under prong B. Um, so you have to think about what is the usual course of the business for every business. So for example, I know we have some moving, companies here. If you're bringing people in who are physically doing the moving, um, even if they bring their own truck, which might be evidence that you're not controlling them, or they're performing the business that you perform. So that's where the challenge is going to be, because you're not going to be able to prove that they're doing something that you don't do as a business. So I think
Yeah,
that.
so
Go ahead, Ken.
if the individuals are working on the core mission of your business, what the true purpose of your business is, and it could be multiple, you might have multiple business activities that are distinct. If you have individuals who are helping you fulfill your mission, then that is very likely that the usual course of business standard is you're not going to be able to demonstrate that they're not helping you in the usual course of business. And the examples that I like to try and highlight is, for example, if you hire a salesperson as an independent contractor to help you generate more business for your business, that is most likely going to be somebody who is deemed to be working in the course of your business. However, if you hire a landscaping company to help beautify your building, then that landscaper is not helping you fulfill the course of your business. Similarly, if it's an electrician, plumber, in our case, elevator company, um,
Yeah, every day.
right, then those businesses are not helping you perform your course of business, your mission. And that's the distinction that I like to draw. What about a bookkeeper? Oh, that's a great question. So we actually had this in the case that I was referring to probably before this call. We represented, Kelly and I, a manufacturer of wedding dresses, and they got audited as a result of a complaint in misclassification audit. And when they would look through the records of the employer to see where they were, how they were spending money, and they were looking at their balance sheet and et cetera, expenditures, their journals, they came across a number of outside vendors, so 1090 people who were paid 1099s. Well, not only were they using some sewers who they said were independent contractors, they turned out not to be. They were true employees. But they also identified the bookkeeper, who was working and had many, many other clients. But they had seen this payment under a 1099 to this bookkeeper. And they also happened to see Fox Rothschild because we provide labor and employment um, services to them. And in both instances, the auditor specifically asked us, well, the employer, this manufacturer, is going to have to demonstrate that those payments, those 1099 payments that were made to Fox Rothschild and this bookkeeper, were not evidence of employment. I said, you must be joking, because Fox Rothschild has hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues. This is a small, this is a tiny entity. It doesn't constitute, we are not in the business of providing legal services, solely to this manufacturer. So that whole analysis didn't make any sense, and that got dropped pretty quickly. But then the second one was the bookkeeper, and what we had to end up doing was we had to have the bookkeeper produce, which is really invasive, and a lot of businesses and vendors will just simply refuse to assist in this situation. But this bookkeeper had been doing the books for a long time and agreed to comply. But we had to produce tax returns for that entity to demonstrate that that bookkeeping company had many other accounts. She had to disclose, revenues and gross revenues, profit, all the typical things that a business would have to show. Plus, she had to show, that she had an independent business, meaning she had her own building or location where she was performing the services from. She had other employees. She had other expenses. She had a website or, advertising, etc. So yes, I mean, a bookkeeper could be deemed an employee if all that bookkeeper does is work for that one entity. And Kelly will talk a little bit more about that, the
Yeah,
distinction.
because I was gonna say maybe not under prong B because they, although they arguably are performing, tasks that really support the business, but you're gonna want to look at how independent they are, which is more of a prong C evaluation, and also how much you control them and how much their pay and all this, which is a prong A issue. So I think it might be a trifold analysis there where you could potentially lose on any one of the prongs in that case. Um,
Can I play off of that bookkeeper example? What if they don't want to tell you who they work for, or if they work for other people? What's your right as an employer to ask that bookkeeper, hey, you got to prove to me that you're working for other clients?
yeah, so that's a problem that a lot of our clients have during an audit because also the state will come and send letters to all of these people that you're claiming are contractors. And most people take them, if they even receive them, and probably throw them out. Like it does not come back to the because they don't want themselves to be audited and they don't want to provide any information to the state because they're afraid that the state is going to then have their number and audit them next. Um, so there's a lot of fear about supporting helping during an audit, and as an employer or as a someone who works with independent contractors, right, what can you do? You can end the relationship, right, but other than that, like, you can't force people to do much.
Yeah, so I just want to jump on that point because I'm glad Kelly mentioned, Tony, your ability as the employer that's being audited to get the assistance of your vendors is economic. It's purely do they want to continue the business relationship or not? Because honestly, these third parties that get these notices from the Department of Labor have absolutely no obligation to provide anything, and many of them will refuse to do so because, for exactly the reason Kelly said, they don't want to be audited or they don't want to become drawn into this. Some very loyal of your suppliers and vendors, like a bookkeeper, in the case that I was referring to before, will actually assist because they want to maintain the business relationship, and they know they fear that if they don't help, then the employer will discontinue the relationship because they didn't show loyalty. Those are the two sides of the coin.
Yeah, but I guess, Ken, why wait till the audit? I guess I'm asking,
Oh,
can an employer
good
ask
point.
one of their 1099s for proof of verification that you work for other people?
Get it up front.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I think definitely if you're going to work with contractors, especially under now how strict it's going to be, to obtain as much information as possible up front, which is going to be hard, in many instances, because that's just not the way some industries operate. And I think that individuals will feel like maybe they don't want to give you all that information up front. But the more information we'll talk about prong C and how you show independence, as much of that stuff that you can gather initially will be very helpful because we have clients who are unfortunately going through an audit and I'm like, well, do you have invoices? Do you have advertisements? Do you have all these things? And it's very hard to backtrack and produce.
Yeah,
Um,
Ken and
We
Kelly, we see
we
this
we
with
use actually a checklist with our clients. So we provide a form that they can provide to their vendors or suppliers to fill out, providing the employer with a lot of information to maintain in the event of an audit. So we try and head it off in the beginning, but as Kelly will describe later, even those efforts may not be sufficient. So
There
anyway,
was a question in the
next
chat.
question.
Mr. Mark Jurowitz. I was saying that, it's troubling when they're insinuating that payments to professionals could be taken as employees. I mean, Clary Carrico is an accounting firm, Fox law firm and such. We have law firms that we perform services for
Sure.
that have basically fee participation agreements with other attorneys. And you can't, it's almost like how could you say that all those fee arrangements with other attorneys are employee arrangements?
Yeah, Mark, I mean, it's a great issue. I mean, the whole of council industry is going to be under, I think, scrutiny.
Right. I
So,
agree. And I
I
think what, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Sorry.
I just think right now we know that they're focusing on certain industries and I think the state views certain industries as those that need protection. Like these employees need protection. They need certain um, minimum wage protections that maybe you're not seeing at like a higher level at a law firm. So we haven't seen sort of the enforcement going to these like um, different industries, but it's definitely possible and concerning. But I think that, the focus on construction and like other gig type workers and industries is because they see these workers as groups that really need that kind of support and maybe are not getting the benefits that, an accounting firm might be getting.
Kelly, do you want to mention, I mean, talking about certain industries, what about streamers? Didn't we just see a case recently about that?
Yeah, I was going to get into this a little bit later
Prong B, right?
because we were talking, so there was a case that just came out in the District of New Jersey that compared the federal standard to the New Jersey standard and found that this group of individuals who stream on like an adult content platform were passed the federal test, but were not able to meet the stricter New Jersey test. So that's just, I was going to bring that up to show how the New Jersey is allowed to put a stricter test in place, and that's the one that will govern. And I was going to talk about that later, but it's just to show like people who are literally only working on the internet. They're not working in an office. They're not working even on a job site. They're just contributing content. But they happen to be in New Jersey and they're employees of a Washington state company. So that was an aggressive case, but they applied the standard.
Excuse me a minute, is that the federal Department of Labor standard or the IRS standard?
That would be the federal DOL standard.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And that case was Tomasello v. ICF Technology and Accretive Technology Group, came out on May 28th, 2026. And I apologize to Kelly for messing up her presentation.
No, that's okay. I just was like thinking, because I'm trying to get through the prongs here.
Yeah.
Well, before you go to C, Kelly, there are two. Tracy, did you have a comment? And then there's two in the chat.
Definitely for the moving industry, the B prong is what we're concerned about most. Moving is seasonal. We could be slow in January and then overwhelmed in June. And owner operators, they have their own trucks, insurance, multiple clients. They operate independently. And I know a lot, reach out to the Department of Labor. Well, I know a lot of my movers members do not want to reach out to the Department of Labor. Who wants to open up that can of worms? Like I would love the department to provide industry specific guidelines for movers. How is there a way to get that done without opening that can of worms and calling the Department of Labor? Nobody wants to do that. There has been mover members that have been audited, and a nightmare for them.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I wanted to say about that. First of all, another part of prong B is the place of business issue. And although they took the example out of that, basically said that if you're in a truck, that is a place of business, and that's going to be evidence that, that you're not meeting prong B. I think that's still the way that they feel. And, and you're still, if you're doing the moving, you're still going to probably fall under it. I think the way that we'll get more guidance is probably not going to be through more regulations. It's going to be, unfortunately, as these cases make their way through the court system, because there's really, and they're probably just going to apply the regulations the way they see fit, and they might carve things out, but unlikely. I mean, real estate agents were able to get a carve out, but that's statutory. So that took, there's a statute that actually exempts them. So that's another route to go.
Another route too is if they went after the illegal movers in New Jersey, because then not only will they get, they're going to get double what they would than a licensed mover who follows all the regulations. And that's
by
another.
the way, because it's come up at the legislative hearing and also, when we met with the commissioner. I mean, we could pursue a legislative fix here at the state level. It doesn't really affect the federal stuff, but so always keep that in mind, that if it gets to be a little too confusing and dicey, I think we should, as a coalition, go in and say, I think we need a legislative fix. I want to get through these two questions really quick, and then Bernie, I know you have one. First one is, as an employee, can you get your 1099 to sign a document attesting to the fact that they work for other people?
You can. You definitely can. And that will be helpful as evidence for you. But that also changes a lot, right? So, what you sign on day one might be different on day, 101. But that's definitely thinking ahead. And I think this is a great transition into prong C, which is how do you prove your independent business, right? Which is what all this kind of speaks to. But go ahead.
Right. I'm sorry, Kelly. I know you're going to. So, what about this question? Then, Bernie, why don't you go first, and then we go.
Yeah,
to the
Tony,
final.
thank you. In hearing the definitions now of A, B, and C, and then having been at that meeting with you at the Department of Labor, where we didn't really get into the weeds with it, it seems to me that there's a number of contradictions between the various prongs, where you may meet it on one prong and partially not meet it on another prong. Like, for instance, in B, where it says the independent contractor, are they performing the mission of the business? Okay, well, in my case, yeah, the business of closing real estate and doing title work, yeah, they're there. If they're a notary, they're there and they're performing the mission, closing the deal. Now, they do that for other title companies, right? So they're not doing it solely. So how can they be an employee of multiple companies? And the control issue, I'm just using myself as an example, control issue, yeah, you have to do exactly what the mortgage company says and what the title company says in order to close the deal and the transaction, and what the attorneys are telling you. So yeah, they're under control.
Yeah, to your point, Bernie, and maybe Kelly or Ken are going to talk about this.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could fail prong B but pass prong C because you could show that they're not working just for you, right? So, and maybe Kelly, good segue. And then we'll go back to the chat box.
Okay, but that my question, Tony, is: do you have to meet all three prongs?
Yes.
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 So that's what I'm saying is you have contradictions among the prongs where you qualify under one, but you're losing under the other.
That's the problem.
You definitely do, and you have to meet all three prongs, and that's going to be the employer's burden, which is challenging, to say the least. Because also within each prong they can view different factors. They could really find one factor to be dispositive in one prong and then, not worry as much about some of the others. And in the analysis, they might not even get to certain prongs if you fail one, because then you would be done in their mind.
Well, maybe let's go over C, and then I think the best use of the next 20 minutes is to answer questions and maybe come up with examples. But yeah, sorry, Kelly.
No problem. So prongs, they're going to be looking at whether the individual has their own established occupation, profession, and business. So what does that look like? How long have you been doing this? How many customers do you have? How much money is coming into your business and from who? Because if you're getting 80% of your income from one company, that's not going to look very independent, right? Whereas if you have hundreds and hundreds of customers, that's going to look more like you're independent and not inside someone else's business. Like, how many clients do you have? How do you put yourself out into the universe? Do you advertise? They really focus on paid advertisements. We've had auditors tell us social media, they don't even look at it. They don't view that as advertising, which I think is really a blunder, and hopefully that changes, because who doesn't advertise on social media? Why wouldn't you take advantage of a free option or a low cost option? But that's just kind of a tangent. Do you set your own prices? Do you have a price list? All of these things will show independence, but there are some things that will not. So just because you're an LLC, that's not enough, unfortunately. Just because you have a license, that's not enough to show that you're independent. Just because you do carry your own workers' comp insurance, that's probably something they'll consider, but that in and of itself is not going to be enough. And you really have to show that you are not reliant on any one of these clients for your income. So for example, the bookkeeper example, if they work just for you, then it's really going to look like a lack of independence under prong C. Whereas a notary, maybe they are going to a million different organizations throughout the day and they have many clients. So they might not fail it under prong C, but then there may be A and B issues like we discussed. But so yeah, the prong C, they're really looking on how can you show that you're an independent business. So then as someone who hires independent contractors, what should you be looking for? You should be looking for the fact that they do have their own business, even though it's not going to be a sole proof. Like if they have their own LLC, that's something. Do they advertise? How many other clients do they have? And unfortunately, the state has concluded that you can be an employee of many. You can be an employee of many employers. So even though that's not the way that we think about employment, we had a case, where a company employed a musician, and the musician did a lot of work for them, and they were not a music company, by the way, and they found them to be an employee even though they worked other places.
Are you talking about the DJ case?
I am talking about a DJ for a restaurant, yes. So that's an example of they found that because of how much money he was making from them, in addition to the fact that he was there a lot, they found him to be an employee even though he had other employment. So that's kind of just seems crazy, but
yeah, in that particular case, it was really interesting. Not the DJ basically had a nighttime DJ business in which, I mean, he had a full-time day job, so we're not counting that. Obviously, he was an employee of another company, but at nights he had this side business, and he had a standing gig at this restaurant like once or twice a week because it was I guess, a side hustle. And he didn't have an extensive list of entities that he was doing DJing for. He had a few, but the majority of his income came from on this side hustle from this one restaurant. They deemed this individual not a 1099, but an employee. It was totally insane.
Really?
They did. Yeah. It was crazy. And also I printed out, this is how I learned about the social media thing.
Yeah,
I printed out several pages of, Instagram and, Facebook, because how does a DJ advertise, right? And they were like, no, not looking at this. So
let's, and thank you, Kelly and Ken. I'm going to go to Tracy McCauley's question because that came up during a legislative hearing. But I think if you were carved out, meaning the for real estate brokers, I think you're still carved out.
Yes.
That's right. So this regulation is clear to say that it does not impugn on any other laws, right? So if there's a law that says that this doesn't apply to you, then that stands.
Here's another one. How and do stopgaps in work affect influence whether a worker is considered an employee or not? I don't think it matters. Seasonal, like we talked about, seasonal.
Right.
They're going to get it the same.
And again, if they did one job for you, ever, you can obviously make better arguments than if they work for you, multiple times or multiple years. They come back every season, kind of deal.
Although I'm gonna jump in on that because our wedding dress manufacturer used models, and the models would go a couple of occasions, like once or twice, and do modeling jobs of those dresses at fashion shows. And they deemed that individual to be an employee. Completely ridiculous.
Yeah, so we got 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure, we address it. But I don't know how everybody feels, but this case by case doesn't seem like it's a good approach to governance. But, because there's a lot of uncertainty, and why take that chance? Tracy, to your point, I think industry-specific guidance is probably a good idea, but maybe we ought to even think about maybe passing some sort of an amendment that really brings some more clarity to this, because I think it's a little unstable now, the way it is.
What's interesting is this whole idea of a case by case was really pressed in the final regulations because the commenters felt that this really, with all the examples, went the other way and didn't give any wiggle room to any industries, which is the reality. But then they kind of said, we're not destroying independent contractors in the state. That's not our intention. And it's going to be case by case.
Yeah, so let me, I think it's worth sharing because I'm going to share my screen. Oh, I guess somebody has to allow me to share, Corinne or Kathy. I want to show you the questionnaire that they would give your 1099 and look at the questions that they ask. Can everybody see the screen yet or no?
Not yet.
Not yet, Tony, and it's not allowing me to give you that.
Oh,
Nope,
wait.
there you go. It's up now. You're good.
So everybody see this?
Yes.
Yep.
So this is the questionnaire that they would give if somebody called and filed a complaint. I think it's worthwhile for everybody that has a concern to kind of go through this. The employer, the 1099 or the employee filing a claim would get this. And if you look at the questions that they ask, to me, that's the tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
What type of business do you operate? Do you have any helpers on the job? Are you required to provide all services the company or can you send a replacement? For the dates of services, do you have other clients? Approximately what percentage of your total self-employment was from the company identified? List of equipment. These are all things that Kelly and Ken kind of covered.
Yeah.
You have a business location? Do you have a business phone number? These are all, I think, part of that whole audit. So, we could send this out to everybody afterwards, but I think it's worth seeing it as an employer, what the questionnaire, some of the questions they would ask.
Absolutely.
How is payment services determined? Do you have any of the following? Business cards, things like that. How do you advertise, to Kelly's point? And then they certify the
Yeah, I see Ed's question, but while we're on advertising, I recently was told in an audit that one thing that can be evidence of advertising is actually lettering on a truck. So I know we have some trucking interests here today. Like, to the extent that you have your name on the truck, that can be advertisements because you're putting yourself out there to the world that this is your company, and it might even have your license number or whatever else is on there. I see. Ed, is there any other factor than a complaint that would trigger an audit? So a complaint is most likely going to trigger an audit, but also they randomly, and I put that in air quotes because we really don't know where they get these ideas from, can randomly come to you any day and say, show me your books. We're starting an audit.
They also go after they identify specific industries. So like a few years ago, they went after the drywall industry. That was a big one. There was a New Jersey Supreme Court case that came out on that. But they targeted basically all of the drywall companies that were in New Jersey, and we're just picking one after the other. And once they got one, then they would go to other ones because it was a whole chain of subcontractors underneath these drywall companies.
Can you talk about Uber? The Uber one was a big one.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
Wasn't that a big one? That was like 100 million.
Yes. So we're going to be seeing probably more cases related to the gig economy because these companies are huge. This is their huge part of their business operation to have these individuals as contractors, right? And unless they change it, and it's a national it's a national company. So are they going to change it just in New Jersey? I don't know. And I could see them just going right in there. But a company like that might take it up to the court to get some guidance,
or seek an amendment through the legislature.
Right.
That might be another way because some of these gig companies, I don't know how they survive under the, if they're deemed to be employers of all these drivers and delivery people and stuff like that.
Yeah, and even taking on all of the liability, which they put on the contractors. So yeah.
Questions. Just put the questionnaire in the chat. Somebody was asking me. Hopefully you guys can click the link there. If not, we could email it. But I guess We got 6 minutes left. What's the takeaway for everybody?
Yeah, so I think it's important to really evaluate how you're interacting with contractors, right now, but definitely between now and October, right? Because they're already enforcing it. And just really try to analyze it and, reach out to your attorneys and figure out how you can best position yourself to use contractors if that's what you want to do, or at least evaluate like what the risks are and the penalties. I can go into the penalties quickly too, so everyone can just be aware of like what they're up against in an audit, if that's helpful. I think that it is, because you should know that, it's going to be a penalty for every individual that they deem misclassified. So there are administrative penalties of $250 per violation for a first offense, and up to $1,000 for future violations. And there's a misclassification penalty, but there's also, if you're misclassifying someone, you're not paying them sick leave and you're not keeping certain records. So you're going to get 3 penalties for each. And also, if they're found to be misclassified, the individual that was misclassified can get up to 5% of their gross earnings for that period paid out to them as a penalty. So that's really where it starts to add up, that 5% number, depending on how much work, they happen to be doing for you. And in an audit, one thing we do as attorneys is we always try to negotiate penalties down, because to be hit 3 times for really the same thing is really tough. So yeah, that's
Hey, Tony.
okay. Go ahead.
No. Hey, Tony and everyone. In hearing, these 3 prongs, and then briefly reading what you just sent over, Tony, on the questionnaire. This is extremely onerous. I don't know, not only from my own industry and related industries, I don't know how anybody's going to comply with all 3 prongs. I mean, unless there's a legislative carve out, or there's some more definition here, or some more, wiggle room on this. I think it's going to, and if it's case by case basis, that's no way to run a government.
You know what, Bernie? I agree. And you were there. I mean, the commissioner, and I look, I think he is willing to come out and meet with us in person. This is on Zoom. I think what I'll do is I'll follow up with his office, invite the commissioner out, maybe sometime over the summer, and hopefully we could pick a location. But I think it's important that if you're on this call and you're still concerned, to show up, because I like Tracy Denora's point that maybe, we can actually do industry specific guidance somehow, FAQs or something that doesn't box them in, but also provides clarity. Because I agree with you, Bernie. I mean, you look at it, you're going to fail one of those prongs, and the catch is, you need all 3.
The state is recovering tens of millions of dollars every year that they weren't otherwise getting when individuals are classified as independent contractors through payroll taxes, the unemployment compensation fund, workers' comp fund, and these audits spread. So if you just get hit with an independent contractor employee misclassification audit, that is going to potentially, once they finish that one, they're going to shoot it over to the unemployment compensation division, then the workers' comp division. You could end up with multiple audits as a result of one of these. And the state is making so much money off this. They're not going to give it up so quick, but I think there could be an opportunity to carve out some industries, and I think that's where the Commerce and Industry Association in New Jersey really comes into play, being helped lobby for something like that.
Yeah, good point, Ken. I know we have a minute left. Any other questions? Really quick, Kelly and Ken, people should be aware that there is the federal, not only Department of Labor, but also the IRS, and so
that's right.
Don't feel like you meet all 3 prongs in New Jersey that you're out of the woods yet.
Well, yes. Well, both the IRS test and the federal DOL test are not as onerous as the New Jersey test.
Oh,
So
okay.
that is good to know. But unfortunately, if you're doing business in New Jersey, you're going to have to face the New Jersey test, which this case that Ken mentioned earlier illustrates it, because the federal test does not have the place of business requirement. It does have like an integral part piece, but it's not. Prong B, let's say, is not as it's not an ABC test, it's a 6-factor test, but it's similar, and they look at the control, they look at all of that. And the IRS test is much more, there's not as many prongs. They just look at like financial control, like who's financially controlling this company, which makes sense for the IRS to be speaking of that, and also behavioral control, who's looking at that. And also, how are these parties related? Are there contracts? So that's really what they look at. It's a lot less onerous, perhaps, definitely than the New Jersey one.
Just to address that really quick.
Francis, I'm sorry, Ken. Francis, I don't know if you have a question or you put something in the chat.
Oh,
Did you want to ask a question? Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, and I apologize for being late. So, is this going to, when they're doing the audits, will it be retrospective years and years and years before, or are we just starting 2026 on?
Good question.
Yeah, so the audits can go back years. They usually start with like a year or two, and if they find violations, they can go back up to 6.
And give penalties up to 6.
Yep.
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm sorry, once again, I missed, but are there materials that you presented or something that we could look at?
You know what, Francis, I can give you the link to the rules that went final in May, but to Kelly and Ken's point, they don't go effective until October. But outside of the rules and the questionnaire that I just put in the chat box, there really isn't a lot out there.
Tony, we published an article with
Oh,
you guys. You could send her that as well too.
Yeah,
which is good resource.
Okay, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think what we'll do, and we could wrap it up, is the takeaway here is, again, I'll follow up with the Department of Labor, invite the commissioner out over the summer. I think it's imperative. I know people go on vacation, but if you're not on vacation, that we kind of continue. The legislature, once the budget's done, they're going to take the summer off. They'll be back in the fall. But if we all think that a legislative fix here that is worthwhile, then we just start building a coalition. We go in and we ask for an amendment, because I do think, Bernie, to your point, case by case is just going to create a lot of anxiety and a lot of problems. And, talk to your attorneys, but I think you just have to be aware of what's going on.
Can I have one more quick question? Is there anything, those of us that use regularly 1099s, is there anything proactive or preemptive we can do at this point so that we're not a target of an audit?
Yeah, Francis, and I won't speak for Kelly and Ken, but I don't know if you guys have an attorney, but you probably want to speak to your attorney.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they can run through the risk of it on like a real case by case granular basis and tell you maybe some things that might help. And also, you can't stop an employee from filing a complaint. So it's hard to avoid an audit entirely. So unfortunately.
But there are things we can try and do to at least work through, the questions with you to determine whether we can bulletproof you or not. So.
Yep.
Yeah, and let's wrap up. I think it's important that we're not trying to scare everybody. And again, to the department's credit, the new administration, he had his entire assistant commissioner crew there. They want to help here with compliance. I just think we got to stay focused and circle back. But, one of the industries that they said they focused on a lot is the construction industry. And I think we mentioned that for a lot of reasons, because a lot of them are off the books or, so again, it's all about the payroll tax, unemployment insurance. So, but I just think this was well worth the hour. So Kelly and Ken, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights. And then for everybody on, stay tuned, because you'll be seeing more from us on this issue. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. And
Thank
you.
feel free to email me if you need Kelly or Ken's contact information.
Fantastic.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Thank you.
very much.
Thanks, everybody.